Thanks so much for joining us. I think that this, your particular expertise is going to be incredibly valuable for someone who is considering a reinvention, whether it's a career reinvention, a personal reinvention. So many of the topics that you've studied that I mentioned in your bio, I think align incredibly well with someone who is listening to the show and thinking about making a major change. So let's start with your story, because you're not just an expert on these topics. You are also someone who's walked your own journey to reinvention. You started in music and songwriting, and I'd love to hear more about that and how you got to where you are today and all the amazing ways it comes together so perfectly.
Well, yeah, this work that I'm doing now, thank you so much. This work that I'm doing now is definitely not what the plan was when I first started out. When I was a really little girl, I wanted to become a singer and travel the world and play music for audiences around the world. And I got to do that for a lot of years. I toured full time and had songs and TV and film, got to work with really amazing musicians. And I just thought that that's the work that I would be doing until I died. Why would I do anything else? This is what I've always wanted to do. But a couple things happened in the midst of that career. The first one is that I had songs that were about difficult experiences in my life, like my family's history of domestic violence, my own history of depression. And wherever we went in the world, those were always the songs that people stayed after shows and lined up wanting to talk about. And they would share their own really personal experiences with those kinds of topics. And a lot of them said that I was the first person they had ever told. And that phenomenon happened so consistently. It's difficult to not think about when that happens. The fact that, first of all, it's a really big honor to be the first person that somebody has told to be, confided in that way. But that also means that they have never told a doctor or a therapist, not even a spouse or a partner or a close friend. And being able to share about these things in our lives is really important to our healing process, our healing journey, but it's also has literal health impacts. So for your physician to not know that you might have a certain kind of history has impacts on their ability to take care of you. And so I started thinking, what do we not know about so many people and experiences? Because there might be some things that humans can only share or talk about in certain kinds of spaces. That's one of the reasons we evolved to make and share art. And I also later founded a trauma-informed creative writing program for girls that are incarcerated, and just saw the same thing again, that they shared a lot of things in their poems and songs that they were not sharing anywhere else. And those things were important to, why they wound up in the justice system, what would they need in order to succeed from here on out. And so again, what do we not know? And why are there things that we can express in the space of the arts that aren't coming out otherwise? So I was thinking about these kinds of big questions as I was a touring singer-songwriter. And then simultaneously, Roger, I have a history of depression that I mentioned, and there's a combination of the grind of the music industry with, these stories that I was carrying from these wonderful people that were sharing things with me that I didn't know how to hold space for, while also taking care of myself, to be honest. And I wound up in a, just catastrophic burnout and major depression. I spent weeks unable to get out of bed, let alone play shows. And I had to fully confront the fact that, I felt like in those days that I was watching my dream be taken from me. This is what I had worked for my entire life. And here it was kind of seeping away and out of me. And I knew I was not going to be able to go back on the road. I knew I was not going to be able to keep doing this. And I had to completely reimagine, okay, well, if this thing that I've always wanted to be and do is no longer what I can be and do, who even am I? And what is it that I'm going to make of my life? I couldn't even imagine a future at that time. But what did kind of keep coming back to me was that question that I had experienced of what was happening in those spaces of the arts? Why were people able to share things that they weren't sharing otherwise? And what did that mean for us as people and our health and as a society and collective? And I kind of kept pulling on the thread of that question until I wound up with a Ph.D. in public health, specializing in the impacts of creativity and the arts on our health and well-being.
So there's a couple of things that I want to double click on. The first, you made some very difficult decisions about your career when you became aware of the burnout, the depression and everything that was going on. You canceled the tour, you canceled the work you were doing, and that's not easy to do. I'm sure that you felt like, wait, I'm letting people down. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because, and I'll tell you why, because our listeners, maybe they're going through something very similar and they're thinking, okay, well, maybe that was easy. I don't know, but it's usually not. I don't think it is. And so I think that story might help somebody say, okay, it's hard and here's what it takes.
Yeah, I think in my case, if I had had any way to hold on to some kind of like crumb of the identity and the job that I had, I would have done it. It really required, for my brain, it had to be impossible for me to keep going, for me to like let my brain admit that there could be a life outside of the one that I defined for myself. And what's funny about that is that I imagined myself to be this really creative person. I was an artist. I was writing songs all the time. I thought that I was like living this very creative life. But when it came down to it, I had one story that I knew how to tell about who I was and what my life was and what my career was. I had one, and I had no way before that moment to imagine myself doing anything else. When the idea would come up, I just like immediately dismissed it. I was like, of course, I am not anything else, and I don't want to be or do anything else than this. This is the only thing that I can do to be happy, to be fulfilled, to think I have a meaningful life, to make the most of my talents. This was it, right? And it's so fascinating on this side of it to think like, the value of creativity in our lives is not just so that we can make art or, have amazing conversations or innovate. Those are all important, but also for the ways that we imagine ourselves as well. So to your point, it was incredibly difficult. I had these conversations with myself where I was like, I don't even know if I'm an artist or if my art counts, if that's not the thing that I'm doing to make, if that's not the main source of my income, am I really even a real artist? Are people going to be angry at me because I quote unquote, set myself up to be this artist? And now obviously I failed at that. There were lots of these really existential, self-deprecating questions that I was asking that on this side of it and years away from it now feel ridiculous. Like if somebody was asking themselves those questions in that same thing, I would be like, oh, of course you are a human, you are creative, you are an artist, you are whatever you want to be. But I had such a rigid idea of where my path could go that it really required, for me, unfortunately, in my case, something to completely upend it. And I had no choice but to reimagine.
Mm-hmm. Were there any, legal obligations? Like, were you under contract? Did you have to go through that part of it as well? Was that part of the battle to to grant yourself this time and space?
Oh, that's a great question. And no, thankfully, at that point, we were independent artists and we could make our own decisions. It was a lot of questioning whether we were letting people down. That was mainly for myself. We had just recorded our most ambitious project to date and hadn't released it yet. So we were supposed to be, quote unquote, supposed to be on a tour to sort of build up momentum behind this big release, right? And nobody was making us do it except for like the career and the plans and the dreams that you have for this album that's coming out and for these songs. You want them to do as much as they can, right? And so it was a lot of grieving what I thought my path was going to be, and also trying to learn how to be open to what else it can be, because there are so many stories that all of us get to tell about our lives. There is never just one.
Let's talk about the identity shift, because you talk a lot that was such a big part of it. And this is a theme that shows up a lot in reinvention. You're going from, and when I think about reinvention, I'm mostly referring to, like, for instance, in my example, I went from selling commercial refrigeration to teaching high school math, like completely different things. My client was Anheuser-Busch. I helped them, make their beer colder without freezing the product. And then I go to helping high school students break through their limiting beliefs in math. Very, very different things. And so there's like that identity shift. Wait, but I was this, corporate person, this salesperson. I earned more money. I had more respect. I had pretty cool clients, and I traveled a lot, all that. Mm-hmm. And then it's like there's this completely different role over here on this side, teaching math, which has its own sets of, responsibilities and definitions and all of that. And of course, making that switch, pretty tough, like it's, it's even hard to introduce myself at a networking event because I'm not sure what to say. Wait, do I mention that am I still the salesperson? Like, because that's what I've been doing for, most of my professional career. And I'm only just starting this transition into becoming a math teacher. So this idea of identity comes up for people on this journey a lot. Tell us a little bit more about the specifics of navigating that, getting to the point where you could see this possibility that there was another identity, and what was that identity as it started to evolve for you?
Oh, I think that process of identity is of recognizing identities begins with kind of like getting honest with ourselves about what are all the stories that I've been telling myself about what this identity is. Because like you said, there are the impressions that we think other people have of a certain kind of identity or title. There are the impressions that we have, the stories we've told ourselves about it, the expectations that we have for ourselves based on that title or that story, the expectations that we think other people have for us. And so I think a lot of that transition of allowing ourselves to kind of think of identity as a soil that we're constantly, gardening in versus something that we find and just like let it go. I think a big part of that is getting honest with ourselves about what we have attached to who we think that we are, because it's not just, oh, I've discovered something that I am, and now I'm going to like take that with me. We have a lot of reasons that are often unconscious why we've decided to latch onto a certain kind of identity or title. And I know that for me, I felt a lot of like what made me feel like I was real or that I could credibly take the title of artist was whether I was making my income from that. And I didn't realize that was so important to me. I would have never thought, like if somebody else was like, am I an artist? And I was like, do you make your income from that? And they were like, no, I would have never been like, well, then you're not really an artist. But I did have that stipulation for myself. And that made me realize like, oh, I have this sense of like, actually like a lack of connection with my own artistry, with my own creativity. And I'm looking for this kind of like something external to me to validate that back to me and say like, yeah, that is real because you're making money from it or something like that. And I had to get honest with myself about that so that I could re-examine and be like, what do I think it means to be a creative? What do I think it means to be an artist? What do I think it means to be a human? What is it that gives us worth? Because apparently the things that I had been going to answer those questions were not as stable as I thought they were. They were crumbling in front of me, right? So yeah, I think that I had to re-encounter and then re-own what it meant to be a writer, what it meant to be a poet. I wound up, while I was in the midst of my depression, I had a mentor who said like, Tasha, you might like academia, you might explore this. And at the worst of you all might appreciate this. At the worst of my depression, I remember Googling somebody pay me to read poetry. Like that's literally what I Googled because the only thing that could interest me at the time was, some poets, Mary Oliver, for example. And I just was like, the only thing I can imagine doing with my time and not hating my life is like reading poems. And anyway, when I Googled that, I found, a master's program in creative writing, and I sent off an application, and I didn't think I would get in because I was like, I'm a songwriter. I don't write poems. And then I got in and then I was like, oh, I have to decide, am I actually going to do this master's degree? And I did. And during that time of like writing without an audience in mind all the time, writing poems to just explore, it gave me a chance to reacquaint myself with what it meant to be somebody who was absorbed by words again, the way that I was when I was a little girl, somebody who could explore and not constantly be censoring myself based on what song, would maybe go someplace on radio or what I thought my audience or my fans were looking for from me. And it was a big re-excavation of all the things that made me want to be a singer-songwriter in the first place. And then that let me kind of encounter myself as a human instead of as somebody who has some kind of title, which, those titles can be taken from us and we can move on from them anytime.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's what makes it so hard for people who are reinventing themselves to go to a networking event and have to introduce themselves because everyone asks, what do you do? And you're like, but to your point, what you do is just another way of asking, what's your title? What's that title that you hold? And then you're, especially when you're in transition, you're like, I don't even know what to say. I had a title for the last 4 or 6 years, whatever that was. And I'm trying to transition into a new title, so I'm not sure what I am at this moment. And I love what you said. I mean, you're a human. You're a human. and you're a human always, no matter what the title is at any moment. And I think that's really interesting. The other thing that I take away from this story is this decoupling of song and writing. And it's like, it's almost like up until then, songwriting was the end. It was the ultimate goal. But then it's almost like you saw writing as a means to an end. And all of a sudden it's like, well, it could end in poetry as well. It could end in other things. And maybe it's about writing and it's not about just this one distribution method or this one avenue for writing. And that, and then I love what you shared about how you started doing the Google search because then you found this master's program, which then, led you down this path where you said, let me give this a shot. Tell us a little bit about making that decision to enroll in this master's program and how that has played a role since.
Deciding to accept, like when they called me and they're like, hey, we've admitted you into this program, deciding to say yes to that was the scariest decision of that entire process. Because up until then, I could tell myself like, well, I've been in bed for weeks, but as soon as I'm better, I'll go back on the road and we'll just like pick up and like do something. Maybe it'll feel a little bit different, but we'll do something, right? But with this, it's like, it was a 2-year program. And it was kind of like, I had all these conversations with the professors, like, what if we get a call from this so-and-so person that we've been in touch with trying to open, and they want us to open for their tour? Like, what if I got to go? And they were, it was so fascinating because they were like, well, then you would go and then you would just come back and continue your program. But I really felt like saying yes to this was kind of sealing this. It felt at the time like a sentence, like this was saying, that is over. We're going to do this. And if after 2 years, I keep doing, something in the music industry, it's not going to be what I've been doing. It's going to be something else. And so it was incredibly scary to say yes. But yes, it did give me a chance, like I said, to explore who I was in creativity without the expectation that this is ever supposed to meet any audience. It wound up like I wrote a book there that did wind up getting published, but I didn't expect that to be the case. I was just, re-meeting myself, And I also found out in that process that I really loved the research. I think I was the only person in my cohort of poets that I was completely nerding out about every research assignment, where I think a lot of them just wanted to we just want to write. They're kind of jumping through the hoop of the research. And I was like, this is the coolest part. And yeah. I found myself really drawn to these questions of, like I mentioned earlier, why is it that people will talk about things and express things about the human experience in the context of art and poetry and song that aren't getting expressed otherwise? Why is it that art and poetry and song can also commit what I was calling at the time social heresies? Like, we can say things, we can speak truth to power a lot of times in art that won't come out in straightforward conversation like this. Why is that? And my commitment to that question and to keep digging to that is what led to the work that I'm doing now. And a lot of that, to your point, was recognizing that everything that I had loved about song and songwriting, not everything, but so much of it had been for my whole life, that was where I felt like I had a voice. I grew up in a fundamentalist environment where, women couldn't preach and, but my dad was a preacher. And if I wrote a song and I wanted to sing it, man, I had an in. I could get up on Sunday morning and play that song. And that was a way I could, if I had a message or if I had something that I was feeling, that's where I could get it out. And so that sense of my connection to song as a place where we can voice things that we wouldn't otherwise voice, where people can hear things that they wouldn't otherwise pay attention to, that was always the kind of center of what I was driving toward in my music. But I was so caught up in the mechanism of it, which at the time was the singing and the songwriting, which I cared deeply about. I still do it, but I couldn't see what the actual thread was. And it's fascinating now to look back and see all the different ways that this has been the thread all throughout.
I love what you said about how you geeked out on the research part of it, while others, were obviously I just want to write, let me write. That's why I signed up. When I went back for my master's in psychology, I was the same. I actually started really geeking out on the papers that they made me read and really getting into it. I just found whoa, there's so many really interesting ideas here, things that I could apply in the real world. Obviously the entire paper was a long version or long way of getting to the point, but it also helped me appreciate the depth of this concept of this, what now at the very end seems like a very simple and obvious idea, but it's like, hey, there's a lot of detail behind that. There are a lot of moving parts, and I get that now. So I totally hear you. And then there's so many interesting questions that get answered through research. And so, there's so much to geek out on. That's really cool. So, you go through this program, this master's in writing, the MFA. What happens next?
At the time I had no idea, but that program wrapped up, and I had been doing this work with a program that became called Project Uncaged. I mentioned this creative writing program for girls that are incarcerated.
Yes.
And I'd been doing that work, and it felt like just some of the most meaningful ways that I had spent my time. And so I spent a couple of years trying to figure out, like, how do we grow this work and scale it and do it in more places. But I was still kind of like pulling that thread of what is it that we don't know about ourselves and each other and our experiences, because we have told ourselves not to express ourselves via art. We've told ourselves that this is this straightforward conversation. This is where life really happens. And other stuff is just like indulgent or something.
Yeah.
What are we missing? what solutions to our intractable problems in society are we missing because we can't hear them, or we can't create them because we're kind of squeezing ourselves into some kind of box of like what's accepted in sort of typical professional society or something. And I really wanted to answer that question. So I also spent that time that I was building Project Uncaged, I was also exploring, okay, I want to keep going with this research. Where does that research belong? Is it sociology? Is it psychology? Is it, anthropology? And I, circuitous route how I wound up in public health. But it's a really ideal space, because what I love about public health is that it's literally everything. Like there's nothing in your life that's unrelated to whether you can be healthy or whether you are healthy. And so it's just this breadth of things that you get to look at as a researcher, as a scientist, as an artist. And the combination of that with the history of being an artist has allowed a lot of creativity and exploration as far as what is it that we're like, I sometimes talk about it as like, how do we human? What does it mean to be human? And what does that look like? And how do we give ourselves space for that? And how do we create communities and systems and structures where other people have more space for that as well?
Yeah. What inspired you to begin on this path to creating Project Uncaged?
I was invited many years ago to be a writer in residence for a program for girls in a juvenile detention facility in Ohio. And it was a really beautiful program where they created art with girls. I think in that program, they also had a choreographer come and dance with the girls. It was like this week-long wonderful thing where each day was almost like a camp, like an arts camp, right? And I was asked to come in and do the creative writing. And that was the first time that I'd ever done anything like that. And since I didn't have my own personal experience with justice involvement, I spent a lot of time beforehand just researching that experience. I was like, how do I make what I'm doing as a facilitator of these creative writing workshops as relevant and meaningful to this specific group as I can? And that required me to learn a lot about them, right? And once I was in there working with them, I just felt like that was the most meaningful way that I had spent my time. And I also learned so much from them. And so I began thinking about, okay, how can I make a similar kind of program in more places? And then not only write poems with them, but publish them in books that we, in Project Uncaged, we publish the books of girls' poems with their permission, of course. And then we send those to, like the mayor's office, city council members, state legislators, along with policy briefs that are kind of like, here's what girls are saying that they need and want in their lives, or here's what's going on, and here's what you can do in your position to help address that. So it became a way to not only, support girls who are in a really difficult situation in their lives. Incarceration is incredibly stressful and traumatizing, but also to make sure that their voices can be part of work that we do in our communities to make our resources for young people better and make it more possible for them to thrive.
I always find it fascinating when I hear these experiences that, they almost seem like, wait, but how did you come across this? And, often it comes from an invitation. Somebody invites you to be a part. Hey, help us out with something. And I think that, and I want to isolate that particular moment, because I think we are often invited to do really interesting things. And I think it's easy to say, no, that's not my lane or that's not my specialty. And so I should probably just say no to that. But it's also where some of the most like magical encounters can come from, where you're like, wow, I could not have predicted this. Of course not. You would have never considered this avenue. So there's no way you could have ever predicted any of its subsequent outcomes. It was impossible for you to predict this. And that's the whole point, is that if you only say yes to one kind of thing because you believe that is it, and that's the only thing that matters, then yeah, life is going to be pretty predictable because there's only so many outcomes that probably comes from that particular path. But when you give the occasional yes to something that you never would have considered before, or just never would have imagined even existed, maybe you didn't even know such a program existed, where artists came in, to a detention center and got really involved in running day-long camps on a specific type of form of art. I mean, if you didn't imagine that, you also could not have imagined all the possibilities, which means then a project like Project Uncaged could never have been a dream, unless you had done this thing. And so I just want to lift that up, because while it seems so like, oh yeah, and so I was invited to do this thing and I did it and it was great and that inspired me, I think it's really important for listeners to acknowledge that, wait a minute, and notice that it's that you said yes to that invitation that then, created, the next several steps that put you in a place to say, wait a minute, what if I could create this and scale this and reach other people in different places? And well, here we are now. You've been doing this for how many years now? I think almost 10?
Yeah, about 10 years. And I will say, to your point, like, to the person who extended the invitation, her familiarity with me was that she had been to a show, and what she said was, it seems like you are very good at talking about really difficult things just really straightforwardly, and our young people really love that. And if you came and did that with them, I'm sure that they would appreciate that and want to write. And she was pulling together, her creativity allowed her to pull together two seemingly disparate things and say, this person is singing songs on a stage. I don't even know if she's ever taught a creative writing workshop in her life. I was in the middle of a master's program, right? But she saw one show and saw a kind of like phenomena where I was talking about a kind of complex human experience, like my depression, just, without a lot of like, and she's like, young people are really drawn to that. And if you can come and just plug that in here. So yeah, celebrating her ability to put these two things together. And then also in a way that I couldn't have predicted, because I had a background in the music industry and like earned media and press, and how you connect something that you're creating with all the different people who might want to. When I went into this kind of program and I was writing poems with these young people, all that my brain could think about was all the places that those poems could go, all the people who would love to read them, right? And so where somebody else might come and be like, yeah, let's write some poems. These were beautiful poems, and have like a closing program and celebrate it and be like, okay, cool, we're done. My brain was really busy with, I knew that if we could get these books in the hands of mayors and the hands of journalists at newspapers, they would be writing stories about this, because I had that history. So it's, the different ways that our paths go, and the different people that we think that we are, those can all feed into new things in ways that we couldn't have predicted.
Absolutely. I love that you talk about this person who had the idea, who saw something that you didn't see. That's another thing that, you talk about doing human, like, what does that mean to be human, to do human? Mm-hmm. And I think that's a key part of inviting other humans into your journey, and, just listening and allowing someone to invite you to something, and then accepting that invitation, which is the, equally as important, because people will see things that we cannot see. They will see one aspect of one attribute that you have, something you've done, a performance, whatever it might be, and then they put it together with another thing, and they do one plus something that you never would have imagined adding it with, and they see how this could equal so much more. You didn't even know there was that other thing to add it to, so you never would have considered doing that math at all. And because they saw that, and I think that's what's so important. I was actually on the phone the other day catching up with someone who I connected with, I think it was back in just about 10 years ago as well, actually. And she invited me into an opportunity that changed my life radically. I mean, almost everything that I have done today started from that moment, this one speaking engagement that she invited me to be a part of. And I had the chance to, we were catching up after so many years, and I've already thanked her on a few occasions, but I just had to use this opportunity to thank her again. thank you for thinking of that. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for this opportunity, because it changed my life. I couldn't have predicted it then. I don't even know if you would have predicted it at that point either, but you saw, at least in that moment, that I could bring value to a particular event. You extended an invitation. I was fortunate enough not to listen to any limiting beliefs, and I just said yes, because you didn't really give me a lot of time to talk myself out of it, because you were like, I need an answer now. And I was like, wait, I'm processing limiting beliefs right now. I need a good excuse why I can't do this. And then I just had to say yes. And then, all of a sudden, a just world of possibilities that I could never have predicted, because I could never have imagined this opportunity myself.
I love that. Yeah. And thank you for mentioning it in a space like this, because, there's those folks in our lives, whether we name them or not, like they deserve so much gratitude and praise in the roles that any of us now can play in other people's lives, opening the same kinds of doors. So important.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's say their first name. Who is your person's first name? Let's say their name. Beth. Mine was Katie. And by the way, crazy enough, she is about to enter a Ph.D. program that will focus on the impacts of music on the brain.
Oh, lovely.
And you and I had just finished speaking like earlier that day. And I said, you won't believe this, but I'm about to have a guest on the show who, like, this is what she does, but like in such a cool way. Like, the role is amazing. So I shared your link with her. I said, like, Google stalk Tasha, because there's a lot of cool stuff happening here. Look at Arts on Prescription, look at everything and all of that. I might have offered that maybe you'd be open to an introduction if she wanted to follow up with you. But my gosh, like, it's so cool. Like, that's the work that she wants to get into now. And it was great to share with her that, hey, there are people doing really important things, leveraging this research, this exact kind of research,
Absolutely.
Because someone like you needs that research in order to prove that this is a valid prescription. And we're going to talk about what Arts on Prescription is in a moment. Actually, let's make this the moment. Let's pivot. Quickly tell us about the PhD. Actually, I'm curious about that. So how did you end up in the program that eventually put you on this particular path?
I started a PhD in rhetoric and communication. That is where I landed, because I wanted to research why the arts help us communicate about difficult things, right? But my particular interest was also in what is the impact of that on our health. And so when I was doing some work in the city where my PhD was taking place, I was also connected with some people who were in public health. And at some point, the person who became my dissertation chair, because early on was like, why are you not in public health? And I was like, I am like a singer. I came from like a, creative writing MA. I don't know what public health even really is. So she invited me to be a research assistant on some of the work that they were doing. And I just immediately fell in love with public health and wound up switching my PhD. I had to do this really quick semester, like boot camp, Master of Public Health, because I did not have one, right? And then continue my PhD. But my focus was on how do the arts, how does creative expression help us to talk about things that we don't otherwise talk about, and be heard by people who might not otherwise give us the time of day or know how to absorb what we're saying, and what is the impact of that on our health. So my dissertation compared different methods, like a survey method to creative writing methods, to look at what can we learn from each of these methods. What are they like? What do people share in these different kinds of scenarios? And from there, I wound up getting to work with some really lovely people who are doing all kinds of different research at intersections of arts and health. I mean, if you think about it, health is like anything and art is anything. So when you talk about the intersection of art with health, you're talking about a really big potential universe, right? But some really wonderful people doing work there, and got to collaborate with Susan Mack-Samlin, the executive director of the International Arts and Mind Lab, and just really enjoyed that. So we kept connecting, and I've been directing research there for the last several years.
Very cool. Well, let's talk about, you wrote a field book on the topic of arts on prescription. Talk about this. Tell us more about this, because when you and I talked about this in our prep call, my mind was blown about this potential solution. And I feel like, wow, it is so timely now. I mean, obviously, we're hearing so many issues with the pharmaceutical industry, so many problems there, so many issues with drugs. And then you shared this really interesting idea with me that just blew my mind. blow our listeners' minds away.
Yeah, well, listeners might not know that in other countries, there's a concept called social prescribing. Many other countries have been doing this for decades, but it's basically this concept that, your patients in a health environment may need something in their community to benefit their health that goes beyond, a pharmaceutical solution or even referral to like physical therapy or things like that. They might need something in their community. That could be housing support, that could be job skills training, it could be, volunteering in order to meet other people. And in social prescribing in other countries, it also includes arts experiences. You might want to join a choir or take a dance class, or it could be experiences in nature. So, tickets to botanical gardens or a park pass or things like that. And in the US, as you might imagine, we do not have things quite like that. We do not have social prescribing with that term.
Nope.
We do have what we call community referrals or non-medical referrals, where in most communities in the US, there are physicians and social workers who can refer their patients or clients to things in the community, including things like I mentioned, housing assistance and support groups, things like that. But we definitely do not have a situation where providers can refer people to museums or plays or dance classes or music lessons, things like that. And so over the last few years, there have been more and more communities in the US that have been creating exactly those programs in their communities. Mass Cultural Council, the State Arts Council in Massachusetts, launched the first statewide arts and prescription program in 2020 and invited me to evaluate that a few years ago. We did that pilot evaluation of that work. And based on what we learned from their work in Massachusetts and a lot of other early pilots around the country, we got to publish this field guide that you mentioned called Arts on Prescription that kind of shows other communities both like, what is this work? And then how you can do it in your own communities. But it is really grounded in this idea of what it means to be well and kind of shaking up what people think that the word health even means and what it would take to achieve it for our communities.
Yeah, this idea of like prescribing a dance class or something along these lines. I mean, so when I talk to people about the journey to reinvention, and a big part of that is, for instance, dusting off your learning skills because you're about to learn some new things because you're going to start something new. And to that end, you really have to dust off those learning skills because if you haven't been actively learning something really new, you're about to. And there's a lot of discomfort that goes with that. There's a lot of resistance at the beginning, so on and so forth. And I often prescribe, go do something like take a dance lesson. Put yourself in a situation where you're doing something that or a golf lesson, whatever it might be, something you've never done before. If you've never picked up a golf club, then go take a golf lesson. And put yourself in a position where you are learning something from pretty much almost zero. And pay attention to that experience. Pay attention to where the resistance comes, how it shows up, all of these things, because this is what you're about to go through when you decide, hey, I want to go from commercial refrigeration sales to teaching math. There's going to be a lot of discomfort. There are going to be a lot of moments you're going to say, maybe this isn't for me. You're about to find out what kind of mindset you have. Fixed for growth. Because if you say, oh yeah, clearly I wasn't meant for this, then boom, fixed mindset. Is that who you want to be? Is that who you need to be in order to reinvent yourself? But it's like these experiences just play such an important role. And so I can only imagine, like, gosh, you're applying these to, or this field book and the research that you're doing and the work you do is applying this to other problems like, health problems, which I think is interesting. Can you give us an example of a particular maybe health problem and like what a possible non-medicine, prescription, like an arts prescription would be for that?
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting. There is a lot of research, Roger, around how arts, music, nature can address really specific kinds of conditions. We've seen there's dance for Parkinson's, where we've seen that individuals who have Parkinson's can move more fluidly and differently with better balance and mobility when they're dancing than walking or doing other things. And so there are dance classes for them. We know that, certain singing and breath work can improve lung capacity. And there's different ways that people can use these kinds of processes and experiences for really specific conditions. But also what we have seen with arts and prescription, the primary way that it's being used is what we might call adjunctive care or in in addition to tools that physicians already have. So it's not so much about wondering how to replace, if somebody comes in and they have symptoms of depression, it's not so much we want to replace the antidepressant that somebody might get prescribed, but what else might they need in their lives in order to have well-being? Or is there something they might want to try on the road to feeling a bit better? And then maybe if they still need some additional support, they can, so not replacing cognitive behavioral therapy, for example, but how might this add to it? And I think part of it is just what you mentioned as far as what are the things in our lives? Well, let me say it this way. The World Health Organization defines health as a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being. Complete physical, mental, and social well-being. That's a really high bar. And not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. That's the full quote. A complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. And still, for most of us and most people listening, if somebody were to say, are you healthy, or what is health? The answer would be really the things that we immediately think of is am I not sick? Am I not in pain? Am I not injured? Do I not have a diagnosis, right? And health is kind of like that absence of the things that we maybe want to avoid, the absence of many kinds of suffering, right? But the actual definition of health is both that absence and the combination of that with the presence of well-being. What would make you feel well? And I get to ask audiences all over the world. I travel and speak and, ask different people to define what is well-being to you. And the answers are really diverse, but they do cohere around some themes around it means to have meaning, a sense of meaning and purpose, a sense of connection and belonging, an ability to explore things that I'm curious about, a sense of efficacy and agency, an influence over things that matter to me, being part of something larger than myself, right? These are some of the ways that people define well-being. And so the task of being, of promoting health in a community or making sure that people can be healthy is not just the task of removing the things that would cause pain or harm or illness, but ensuring that we have the things in our lives that make us, as I typically say, want to be here. At the core of well-being is having a life you want to participate in and feel like you can. That's what it means to be well. And I think a lot of people who are looking for reinvention are in a similar kind of journey for that, of maybe I've had the things that keep me from what I'm afraid of, but those aren't the same things as what pulls me forward and make me want to be here. And how can I identify what that is? And so Arts on Prescription is giving a tool set to providers that they've literally never had before, as far as what would make somebody feel connected. What's the typical GP supposed to do for somebody who doesn't feel like they have a sense of community in their lives, right? The best they can do is offer a little bit of advice. But if you have a way to recommend that person go to this music class or this kind of artistic or cultural community, and they could actually meet people there, and they can go there for free because they have a prescription through this program, then you actually have a tool that can address some of these well-being needs versus just the absence of disease needs.
Yeah, I love what you said about how we define health, and how it's really easy to define it as the absence of, nothing hurts, so I guess I'm pretty healthy. But, and you just made me reflect on how I assess my health at any given time, especially, I would say, maybe in the last 5 to 10 years. And a big part of it was, I would say, even especially in the last 5 to 7 years, I had this really big awareness of, I want to feel like I have energy to do things that matter to me. That's how I define health. So even if I'm not going to the doctor because nothing's really bothering me, if I can't get up and do the things that I really want to do, and I don't have the energy to do that, then I don't consider myself healthy. Mm-hmm. Even when I think about my health goals, there was a time when I used to play soccer more regularly in men's leagues and things like that. And I shifted how I thought about working out. I used to think about working out in terms of, hitting certain metrics, like a certain weight, or to be able to lift a certain amount of weight, or whatever that metric was, that was very grounded in the exercise itself. And then one day I shifted that to, I want to be able to play a full match without having to be subbed out. That's what I want. That's it. That's the goal. That's why I want to work out, to be able to do that. That's why I want to go through this effort, because that's how I define my really great physical well-being, is to be able to do that. If I can't run up and down a pitch for 90 minutes, then I don't consider myself the level of healthy that I want to be. Now it's, it's with my daughter. I want to be able to pick her up easily from all sorts of different positions, and be able to get her up, throw her up, and be able to move around with her, be able to carry everyone's suitcase, like everyone's luggage and suitcases to the airport so that my wife can have her in her arms, all of these things. And I've just been mindful, this is like really my goal. And so, yeah, this idea of how we define our health, what that is, like you said, it could be based on what I don't want versus what I do want. And in the journey to reinvention, a lot of times what I share with people is, be careful that it's easy to, if you have a bad situation in your current job, or you're really upset with your boss or whatever it might be, you can just go and get another job. You can just go and apply to other jobs. The problem is with that situation is that you're running away from something, which also means you're not running towards anything intentional. You're just running away from something, and it's easy to land in the next job, but it's also easy for that job to be really bad, maybe even worse than what you had before. And I've worked with clients who had that. And I think there's this combination that we need to have. It's okay to run away from something that's really bad for you. That's important too. But it's also important to have this goal or outcome that you're going to. And I feel like that's kind of the equivalent of what you're saying with, it's not just about ridding myself of some disease. It's also about being able to do the things that I want to do and feel the way I want to feel from the perspective of my health and well-being.
Yeah, having a sense of that basic meaning and purpose, that you can imagine a future for yourself. These are really fundamental well-being things that I think a lot of times people think that thriving is thriving is extra. Like really health is like, if you can survive, that's health. And if you get to thrive, you've somehow achieved health plus. But actually thriving is just health. That's what it means to be healthy. And what's interesting about that to me, especially in public health and as an artist, that puts a lot of onus and innovation and creativity on all of us as a collective, because a world in which somebody can find that capacity to thrive is not a world that any individual can create for themselves. That all of us in the unique different things that we do in our communities are playing a role to some extent in some way in somebody else's ability to be healthy, to either have that absence of disease that they need, or to have that presence of well-being that they need, or both of those things together. And so it can help reimagine, even the roles that we think that we have in the work that we do. It's not just, my own personal journey of finding something that allows me to thrive, but my recognition of what I'm doing might provide that for my community, might provide that for the people who come after me. Like, how is the work that I'm doing part of what I call a fabric of community care? That there is no, we have some statistics in health that 80% of people's health is determined by something outside of the clinic. And a lot of that has to do with community factors, with what we call social drivers of health, and also our connections with other people, the opportunities that we have or don't, the resources that we have or don't. And so what that gives me as a creative, and then of course also as a scientist, is this sense of how are we all connected? How's the work that we're doing so interconnected? So much of the work that we all get to do has so much more to do with opening up doors for other people to find their own paths to well-being than we might imagine. And it's just that reframing of what do we think it means, basically 3 questions. What is health? Where and how is it actually created? And who is part of that process? What is it? Where and how is it created? And who's involved? If you can shake up those three questions, then it often opens up a lot of new ways to think about who you are and what you do and where you could go from here and how it matters.
Yeah. I would argue then that I think the ultimate mission of reinvention is to thrive in the way that you define it. And all of the things that we can do, because one of the things I talk about when it comes to reinvention is that it's not just your job. It's reinventing all different areas of your life into alignment with who you are and who you're becoming and what matters to you at this moment, because we're going to grow in 5-10 years. What matters to you today may not matter to you anymore, and that's okay. Then you can reinvent yourself again and reinvent all those parts of your life. But that includes your health, your relationships, your wealth, your career as well, and all of these different things that you're doing. All of this is included in that. And so there's all these areas. And when you talk about thriving, I feel like that's where these 2 areas intersect. It's not just about your job. It's not just about your business. It's not just about making all the money in the world. It's about making sure that these other areas, such as a sense of belonging, a sense of community, all the other types of well-being, that they're there for you. Tasha, thank you so much for this conversation. I think the work you do aligns so incredibly well with the challenges for people that are reinventing themselves. And I think that anybody who hears this episode right away is going to get massive value from this. For those listening, all of Tasha's links are going to be in the show notes. So do check her work out. You can go to her website. You can sign up. I think you have a newsletter, some downloads and things like that. Yeah. Your field guide is there. So there's a lot of things. Also, you can find her music as well. I'll make sure to link some of your music because I found some when I was doing my research and I was listening to it before the podcast. So I wanted to listen to it as well. And it's really good. I really enjoyed it. So thank you again for sharing so much of your awesome insight.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Roger. It's been lovely to talk with you.
Awesome.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the School of Reinvention podcast. Again, I'm your host, Roger Osorio. If you're ready to start your journey to reinvention and want to walk the path with others, visit www.rogerosorio.com and go to the School of Reinvention to check out for yourself how a community-based coaching platform can help you begin your next reinvention. You can also go to rogerosorio.com to purchase my new book, The Journey to Reinvention, and receive some exciting bonuses. Until next time, make your day great.